The second UU principle, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, points us towards something beyond inherent worth and dignity. It points us to the larger community. It gets at collective responsibility. It reminds us that treating people as human beings is not simply something we do one-on-one, but something that has systemic implications and can inform our entire cultural way of being. Compassion is something that we could easily act on individually. We can demonstrate openness, give people respect, and treat people with kindness on our own. But we need one another to achieve equity and justice. Justice, equity, and compassion are all part of the same package. Today I will be focusing on the idea of raising our voices in the cause of justice, equity, and compassion, speaking out for those whenever we are able, and the idea that second principle calls us as UUs to use all the opportunities we are given. Horton was a UU elephant. He is first motivator in compassion. He hears a voice calling out for help, and even though he can't see them, he responds to their cry. No matter their difference in size, he seeks to treat them fairly and compassionately right away. Horton understands equity not as an external quality, but as an existential commitment. It's the understanding that no one is privileged and that the worth, value, and dignity of each person is as important, as sacred as one's own. Horton says the things that justice and equity moved by compassion demand. I've got to protect them, I'm bigger than they. But don't harm all my little folks, you have as much right to live as us bigger folks do. And what is the response of Horton's community to his insistence that there are actually people where the rest of them do not see people? They seek to silence him and destroy the source of their embarrassment. Sound familiar? It should. Voices of dissent have ever been hated and silenced. Such carryings on in our peaceable jungle. They don't want to rock the boat. We are going to stop all this nonsense, so there. You're going to be roped and you're going to be caged. How many ways have people who have voices of justice and fairness been roped and caged? Will you please get rid of this thing? How many times have individuals as well as whole groups of people been treated as things to be gotten rid of? Think about the few people in recent history who were leading movements in the direction of fundamental change towards justice and equity for large segments of people and in ways in which they were silenced. In the UU community, we have a whole network of people committed to the purpose of raising voices and taking action to promote justice and equity in the world. The UU Service Committee is an active worldwide for those interested in joining your voice with theirs. This book is a children's book. And so at the end of the book, when Horton's community hears the desperate screams of people who are about to die, they relent, and more than that, they repent. And automatically, at the hearing of their voices, are moved to do what they can to help protect these small people. In our world, that's fantasy, but it doesn't have to be. When I was growing up in the Methodist Church, we were often taught that the most important of Jesus' teachings was to love your neighbor as yourself. This important teaching has stayed with me as a deep part of my spiritual foundation. Over the years, I've continually tried to embody this principle in my spiritual journey. Coupled with this teaching were stories about people who were not as well off as ourselves. We were often told that other people in the world didn't have the food, the clothing, the loving families we had, and therefore we must learn to give to others. I can remember being asked to save our dimes and nickels for a certain project, a Thanksgiving basket, or Christmas offering to give to the poor. I often wondered, who are the poor? Where are they, and what is my relationship with the poor? Who are these people? What would it be like to know people like this? I often wondered if people who we were supposed to care about were so important, why didn't we know them? It struck me how in the teaching of our church about helping others, we were somehow making our compassion into charity, which was about giving to people who are somehow second-class citizens. While the church teaching was about love your neighbor as yourself, it became give to your neighbor who isn't really as good as yourself. That's what I felt was being taught. But it isn't what the teaching of the Golden Rule says. It says, love your neighbor as yourself. This message somehow got garbled in its translation. The concept of compassion is taught in all the world religions. The Golden Rule takes different forms in world religions, but it is central. In Judaism, a story is told about the wise sage Hillel, who was asked to recite the entire Torah while he stood on one leg. Hillel stood on one leg and replied, what is hateful to yourself, do not do to your fellow man. That is the whole of the Torah. The remainder is but commentary. Go and study it. Hillel believed that the whole of the Torah's teaching could be summarized by this statement of the Golden Rule. The golden rule is also found in Muhammad's words when he said, "Not one of you can be a believer unless he desires for his neighbor what he desires for himself." In the religion of Islam, compassion and love for others is just as important as it is in all the other religions. In Buddhism, there are 4 elements of love: love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. If you practice love with compassion, joy, and equity, you have to have immeasurable love, because this kind of love helps you to grow. This kind of love makes you happy as well as the person you are trying to learn to love. This kind of love is said to heal the illness of anger, sorrow, insecurity, and hatred. In fact, Buddhist teachers say that practicing love, compassion, joy, and equity is the very nature of enlightenment. The second of these kinds of love is compassion, called karuna, the attention and capacity to relieve and transform suffering. The word compassion has 2 parts: kam, meaning together with, and the word passion, to suffer. This implies that we are together with and loving another person in their suffering. You have deep concern for another person. You listen deeply to the other person in their pain. You are, in fact, in communion with another person. But the implication is that you really need to know this other person in order to have compassion and to show compassion. But when you practice compassion also with love, joy, and calmness, you are with this person as equals, both suffering in your lives and both having joy in your lives. Recently, I watched the movie of Gods and Men. This movie tells the true story of a French Trappist monastery in Algeria in the 1990s, during a time when the Christian-led government was in violent conflict with some Muslim groups in the country. The monks in the monastery were led by their elected leader, Christian de Church. The monastery was located in a little town where the townspeople were very involved with the monks' community. Some of the townspeople worked in the monastery. The monks ran a clinic for the town, and the monks sold honey in the town market. You see in the movie the way that the monks were very involved in the daily lives of the townspeople, a part of their family celebrations, a part of their daily lives. So, when the government soldiers came banging into the monastery declaring that they must protect the monastery from the Muslim terrorists with their arms, and Christian the abbot tells them no, that they refuse a violent means of protection, the monks have some disagreement. Some of the monks feel that they should leave the country and return to France, their native country, since this conflict has nothing to do with them. They don't feel safe there. They spend some time praying and discussing this. Some of the monks say they feel that this is their mission, to stay with the townspeople and continue to be with them and help them, even if they are not safe. When they vote, all the monks decide to stay. They all believe that their God asked them to be with the people in their trouble, not escaping to safety just for themselves. Their religion teaches them that loving their neighbors as themselves means taking the same risks that the townspeople take and being there with them. Eventually, the terrorists kidnapped 7 of the monks and murdered them. Christian de Church, the abbot, left a letter for his mother that he had written months ahead of his murder. In this letter, he predicts that he might be killed by the Muslims, but he says that he forgives them. He believed that Christians and Muslims could live together practicing their love of God, the same God, showing there could be peace among them. He explains, "The only way for us to give witness is to be what we are in the midst of ordinary, everyday realities." He demonstrated in his love and in his death that compassion means showing love, joy, and peace with other people, even those very different from yourself, even forgiving them when they harm you. But compassion is not about feeling sorry for others. It's not about all the money in the world given away in charitable donations. Even though that is still necessary and needed, it is about our involvement in others' lives, holding others' pain, being with others in their joy, but being totally immersed with people in relationship, so that we are there when they need something. Living with compassion can mean being together with others in their joy and their sorrow. The Charter of Compassion is a statement that was initiated by Karen Armstrong in 2009 when she was given the TED Prize. The TED Prize looks for people who have wishes big enough to change the world, and awards the people who can take the prize money and make something big happen. Karen Armstrong told the TED Committee that she wished that you would help with the creation, launch, and circulation of a charter for compassion, crafted by a group of leaders who are very inspirational and from the 3 Abrahamic traditions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and based on the fundamental principle of universal justice and respect. She gathered a group of thinkers from across the globe, and they wrote a charter that is now being taught about and embraced by thousands of people. The opening statement of this charter says, "We believe that a compassionate world is a peaceful world. We believe that a compassionate world is possible when every man, woman, and child treats others as they wish to be treated, with dignity, equity, and respect. We believe that all human beings are born with the capacity for compassion, and that it must be cultivated for human beings to survive and thrive." It begins by talking about how the principle of compassion is at the heart of all religious and spiritual traditions, being called the golden rule by many. It goes on to define compassion as taking ourselves out of the center of our own world and putting others there. The loving our neighbors as ourselves really means it. And it says, honor the unbreakable sanctity of every single human being, treating everyone without exception with absolute justice, equity, and respect. The Charter goes on to talk about our polarized world, where political and ideological boundaries separate ourselves from each other. It speaks of our deep interdependence and the need for compassion to be at the heart of all human relationships. In this not only polarized world, but in this deeply uncivil world, where religious meetings places, like the Buddhist temple in Columbus this past week, are burned to the ground because of one's intolerance of another's religion, where people driving on highways exhibit their stress with road rage, where it is acceptable to make a political speech declaring that all gays should be rounded up and killed, when freedom of religion means your religion is the one and only true religion. In this hurting and hurtful world, how can we begin to show an example of true compassion? There are many people in this world who base their lives around the concept of true compassion for others. People who work directly with people in their pain and difficulty while representing their equal position in the world. Karen Armstrong, in her book, 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life, talks about several people who live their lives like this. She tells the story of Christina Noble, an Irish woman who grew up in Dublin, basically as a street person, sleeping in public toilets and parks. She had no one to turn to when she was raped by two men on the street. And when she found she was pregnant after the rape, she had no one to help her through her pregnancy. She ended up in a relationship with men who were abusive until she finally decided she had to turn her life around. When she did, she had a dream that she wanted to help other people who had experienced the kind of suffering that she had. She went to Vietnam and saw homeless children on the street living the kind of hopeless existence that Christina herself had experienced. She reached out to these children and founded an orphanage where children could learn about their own worth and dignity, where children could be loved and treated with humanity. She says that when she was a child, she needed just one person who could understand her suffering. She has become the person for many. Compassion isn't just about heroic deeds like founding orphanages. It's a spiritual practice to be followed every day. How do we love our neighbors as ourselves? I believe it's about knowing our neighbors before we can love them, knowing our neighbors as human beings, treating each person we meet with worth and dignity, as our first principle reminds us. I believe it's about reaching out to people who may be different from us, reaching out to people who may not agree with us about our views of religion, sitting down with people who may not share our background and getting to know what their life is like, having coffee with someone who may not vote the same way we do, but understanding where their values and beliefs take them and their political views. So how do we do this? I know many of you have found ways to do this in your own life. Some of you find ways in your own jobs of broadening the people who you know and reaching out to people in a compassionate way. Like getting involved in your community with a voluntary commitment or a personal commitment in your neighborhood. Some of you volunteer for service organizations, some are literacy tutors, some of you help at hospitals or hospice to take extra time to speak to the people you are serving, getting to know them as individuals. Some of you are involved in environmental groups who reach out to the community. Some of you may volunteer in your schools and get to know people that you wouldn't have known otherwise. As a church, we are coming together to offer support to LGBT folks, their families, and allies. Becoming a part of the community we have formed here and getting to know people here you wouldn't have known before. Reaching to new people and finding ways of including them in our activities. Getting to know our youth and getting involved in their activities. All this can be part of a compassionate life. Every day, whoever we meet in our lives deserves to be treated with love, joy, and calmness as a deep form of compassion. Sometimes the most difficult people to treat with compassion are our family members who often get on our nerves. I think a spiritual practice of compassion could be sitting down with a family member who drives you crazy and find out what's bothering them, what's going on in their lives, that might cause them not to be as easy to deal with. Having compassion means having love, joy, and peace, and sharing someone else's suffering. A life that is lived with compassion to me means a life that is lived intentionally in reaching out to many kinds of people, lived in a way that notices someone else and what their experience in life is all about. I'd like to end with the loving kindness meditation that teaches us how to feel compassion to others that we know and that we don't know, and also for ourselves, because we are told to love your neighbor as yourself. That starts with loving yourself. Please join me in this form of compassionate prayer. First it'll be may I, and then it'll be live in safety, be happy, be healthy, may I live with ease, and then it'll be, and I'll say what it's going to be for the next one. So, may I live in safety, may I be happy, may I be healthy, may I live with ease. And the next one is in safety. May you live in safety, may you be happy, may you be healthy, may you live with ease. May he or she live in safety, may he or she be happy, may he or she be healthy, may he or she live with ease. May they live in safety, may they be happy, may they be healthy, may they live with ease. May it be so. Stand and join